people probably already know about it, but.
Well, Breaking Balls is my podcast that I do with my cousin John, who is a Mets fan, and my fiance Daniel, who's a Yankees fan. He's the one who produces it and turns it into a show. We've had a bit of a hiatus because Daniel and I have been moving. We are going to settle somewhere in the next week and a half or 2 weeks. So the third week of February, we're going to start back up again. And it was a project that started during the lockdown and in March. I'd always kind of wanted to do something like this, but you know how it is when you guys started, like you feel you're excited and all of a sudden you're like, wait, is anyone going to listen? Like, what if nobody listens to this? And that was something that I was fearful of. And my fiance really pushed me. He was like, just do it. Like, just put an episode out there and you'll never know until you find out. So I did. And people listened and it's just one of the greatest things that I've ever done. And I never knew that I could be creative like that in so many different ways. Like, so it's just awesome. Anyone listening, if you are thinking of starting a podcast, I highly suggest that you do it because it's going to be way more rewarding than you even think it's going to be.
It's an absolute blast.
It is. It really is.
I mean, because you're in control and you're just saying things and you have no idea if anyone's out there. So I hope today that we have some people in the chat. We usually do get some, but we'll see what happens. I know that you are an ARod historian, and I wondered if you could tell us about that, about being a historian of ARod.
Well, it's sort of tongue-in-cheek, but I mean, I guess it is kind of, oh, sorry, my sister's dog is whining. It is a little tongue-in-cheek, but it is kind of true because I do know a lot about him. He's always been my favorite player since I was a kid because admittedly, I was a Mariners fan when I was 7 or 8 years old because my dad and my parents, they're not big pro sports fans. My dad went to Navy, so he's a big Navy football fan, but he would just watch whatever's on. So I don't have like a legacy of sports fandom as far as like the Yankees or the Mets or anything like that. So Ken Griffey Jr. was huge when I was a kid, and I loved Ken Griffey Jr. And who was on the Mariners team back in those days? A young, extremely handsome ARod. So I was like, oh my God, I love this guy too. So I just always loved him. And when he came to the Yankees, it was like the best day. And then when he got popped for PEDs, I was like, for God's sake, it's hard enough to be an ARod fan because so many people hated him already. So I was like, of course he has to use PEDs. So now I have even more to defend. So I've kind of doubled down on my fandom of him. And it turned into ARod. I'm just now a historian. I'm just keeping track of his life and filing it away for fodder online, I suppose.
Right, exactly. And you do take a lot of crap for that, actually, especially when the Hall of Fame voting comes around. You hear it.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys have heard this, like with anything, like if there's like something that, you feel self-conscious about or something that people make fun of you about, if you own it, they can't use it to hurt you anymore. So This was years ago. It was like when I first started using Twitter, I used to get like really upset and I would get really tuned up, and it was really easy to push my buttons with ARod because I would like get so defensive. But then I was like, why do I care what any of these people think of him? Like, I don't care if you actually hate him. Like, you can hate him all you want. You cannot think you could say his stats don't count because the reality is they do. And why do I care what Yankee Boy 87625 thinks on Twitter about him? And it was just being used to like get me fired up. So I mean, it still does work sometimes, but I have gotten better at like not letting it get me too upset because it's like, whatever, you can hate him, I don't care.
Right.
He's a bozo,
actually,
and I love him.
You getting upset is one of the funnest things about being on Twitter.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, you getting worked up about something, I like get popcorn. It's a good show.
Well, lucky for you, it happens pretty often. I mean, I have these conversations with myself, but I'll still get worked up about it the next day. It doesn't always stick.
It's also fun on your podcast as well because you and your cousin really get into it sometimes, and the dynamic is, first of all, hilarious. It's redundant to say that, speaking of you, but it's also that, you're not going to take crap, kind of like, I'm on this hill, I'll die on it, and you go back and forth, and we love it. And so I just want to do a shout out. We have a lively chat already.
Yes.
So I just want to say hey to Lori, Yankee King, FG, Joe. Good to see you, Joe. Might be our first time seeing you in the chat. Gotta love it. And
Gotta love
Elliot,
that.
our friend Elliot. So thanks for being back. And I know I don't have to invite you to share your thoughts, but we certainly want to see them in the chat. So Em, back to ARod for a second. Yankee King is asking that question there. Am I the only one that doesn't care if players use PEDs?
No, I mean, I certainly don't. I can understand. Let me put it this way. I don't care. I don't think that it detracts from a player. I think that it's part of their career. It's one of those things that I think that it's not okay. It's against the rules. So whatever, I understand why someone like ARod or even Barry Bonds and so forth are being excluded from the Hall of Fame. I may not agree with it because it is part of the game. It's part of the game's history. And the commissioner who was tasked to be in charge of the league and make sure that these things don't happen, he's in the Hall of Fame. So if we're going to call Bud Selig a Hall of Famer, how are we going to then exclude the era of players that played under him, and how are we going to say that he's one of the best commissioners of all time? So it's I can understand both ways. I don't appreciate, no one asked the BBWAA voters to revise history. No one asked them to keep out the guys who use PEDs. So I don't really agree with their decision collectively to do that. So, but at the end of the day, they're the ones who get to vote and not me. So it's because there is no rubric for them to follow. I suppose it's a lot more difficult than I'm making it sound. And that's why you do have guys like ARod who get, 40% of the vote, but they don't get the other 35 to get in, because it's really up to the individual voter. And I think that the Hall of Fame is right in having it be that lax, because the Hall of Fame doesn't want their history revised. They want the people who are tasked with writing on day in and day out to then write the history of it, I suppose, when it comes to the Hall of Fame. But in this day and age with the internet, like, it was sort of like with Madison Bumgarner's no-hitter in the 7-inning game. MLB didn't recognize it as an official no-hitter, but if you Google Madison Bumgarner for the rest of his life and then beyond that, that's going to be part of his Wikipedia page. It's going to be part of the conversation online. So these things don't go away. It's not like it was in the past where all you had was a Hall of Fame and then stories from people who watch players. Now, everything, every pitch, every swing is recorded and is online for people to find. So the history of the game is a lot different than it was, and as far as who controls it, even like 30 years ago.
Right, absolutely.
100%. Hey, Tats.
Good morning, ladies.
Hey, what's up, Bobby?
Hold on, No, I have to interject real quick on this whole thing with Madison Bumgarner. All right, that was a no-hitter. Okay, he played in the parameters of the game, that rules that was set that year, and it did not take away. It's not like he had 2 less innings than any other pitcher that season. So I'm sorry, that was a no-hitter, and it deserves to be in the record books as such.
Totally agree. Especially when they have like the combined no-hitters. It's like, okay, so we recognize a combined no-hitter where you had 4 different pitchers go across 9 innings, but we're not going to recognize that this guy did it in regulation because of it was a different year and they changed the rules. Like, MLB is constantly getting tripped up by that, though, that they have to make changes. Like every other pro sport has made changes to sort of keep up with the times to a certain degree and keep up with the strength and the speed of the athletes to keep them safe. And MLB has been largely unchanged. So that's given the fans, it's given fans the false idea that like the game hasn't changed at all. So that's why they get really frustrated when MLB suddenly has to do a lot of changes, because to them, they're thinking, oh, well, not much has changed, where we know that a lot has changed. So when MLB, they kind of throw these changes at people push back against it and call it not real baseball because they've waited so long to do different things to keep up with the times. So then they dump a whole bunch of changes, and then the pandemic also exacerbated all of these changes. So you have people that are like, that's not real baseball, it doesn't count, but
I'm one of them.
It is.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that's always going to be the tension between MLB and how they operate and the Hall of Fame and their rules and standards and how Players get nominated and then in. And so we know that the fan base, I mean, if Twitter's been hot about anything while everything else is cold, it's been about the recent selections. That's really selection, plus we already knew one of them, right? So so there's always this cry about, it shouldn't be the writers, it should be the fans, it shouldn't be based on PEDs. It should be based on overall performance.
The reason that it's the writers and not the fans is so there's no bias. But now the writers are becoming just as biased as the fans were expected to be.
And to Emily's point about there's no rubric here. This is a subjective process, no matter how you slice it, and you gotta have some relationships and make damn sure that they're great, solid relationships with some winks and nods in between, so that writer, that writer is your ticket, or getting kicked off the HOF train.
Right.
So is that really fair? I don't know. Well, I do know, but we don't have time, and you don't want to hear me go on about it.
Well, just
but
briefly,
that's going to be the tension, and
it is the tension.
And I think,
just briefly, I want to mention Joe DePolo's. He says thoughts about PEDs interesting. Thoughts on shilling. Now we don't have to go into a whole shilling thing, maybe, but it is apples and oranges, and the question is character. Character gets considered, right?
That's what keeps the guys who were suspected of PEDs but never suspended. Right. That's what keeps them out, is the character clause. And I mean, listen, character clause aside, because I think that it actually doesn't get used as much as it does. And I was going to make the point that I feel like we've kind of evolved past the need for something like a Hall of Fame as a society because of the internet, that we know too much about these guys. Like, I don't really like the idea of celebrating someone like, Omar Vizquel, who, beats and terrorizes his wife. Like, I don't think that he deserves a day of pomp and circumstance. Like, if anyone's ever been to the Hall of Fame induction, it is like an old school celebration of these players. They literally get a parade down Main Street. The entire town is shut down for the entire weekend to celebrate them. There's a field that is filled with thousands of people baking in the hot sun for hours to get a glimpse of them as they get inducted. So I think that because of all we know about all these guys, including Barry Bonds beat his wife too. I think that should exclude him from the Hall of Fame. Roger Clemens had inappropriate relationships with teenagers. I think that should exclude him from the Hall of Fame. And I think Curt Schilling, he said that he doesn't want to be in the Hall of Fame. So I think that regardless of what you agree, disagree with the things that he does and says, I think that right there is all that he has to say. If he doesn't want to be a part of it, then why not give him his and give him that wish? If he doesn't want it, then so be it. Then move on without him. The game is going to remember him no matter what. That's the thing. Everyone's going to remember that stupid bloody sock because that stupid thing is in the Hall of Fame. It's in a case in the Hall of Fame. So it's not like the game forgets these guys if they don't get their plaque, if they don't get their weekend of celebration. It doesn't. So do we really need to celebrate scumbags? Like, is that really where we're at, where it has to happen,
No, with you 100%. And you know what? It's up to their teams to decide if they're going to retire the number. Honor them that way if you have to. I still wouldn't want to see some Yankee scumbags in Monument Park. And
totally agree.
We'll torch the stadium in protest. I'll be out in the baking sun like others in Cooperstown if they were even try. But so they have that, and I totally agree with that. I don't think we'll see the morality clause really enforced, and so it is what it is. And that's going to mean that some really storied players like ARod, who legit looking career wide, are the greatest of all time. And for like a, little band of time in their career really effed up. That's just going to be the ongoing thing.
Right, it's part of their legacy. And they made, ARod and company, he made this bed so he can lie in it. And I think that part of ARod's little redemption tour that he's been on to get back into the good graces of baseball as a whole and some fans is owning that he's owned the fact that he acted like an idiot, that he doubled down when he would get caught and it did not look good for him and it was immature and it was stupid and he sort of has owned it and accepted it and discussed it publicly. And I think that has a lot to do. I mean, that's true for all of us in life, right? Whether we're famous athletes or just people, it's just owning the kind of bad shit that you've done and like letting people know like, hey, sorry about that. And usually that will allow you to move forward in life and get over things.
Yeah, and it's paid off in some ways for ARod. I mean, he's doing well with his booth venues and everything. We know that Jeter doesn't exactly buy into the tour he had. We saw that live. But yeah, and how many really do own it in the way that ARod did? So I think that he does deserve respect for that.
Yep.
Thank you. I'll take that as a win on the ARod.
Now that we've gone down the Hall of Fame rabbit hole, let's pull ourselves out of there. And I thought we'd go on to another equally controversial topic, and that is women in sports, women in baseball. I found an interesting thing on Twitter this week, and it's I think raises a lot of hackles. It was from iTalk Studios at iTalk Studios YT. And they said, hey, Agent Rachel Lupa, where can I find a list of all your clients? You claim to be a success story and a champion role model for women in the sports agency world. Yet pretty much the only major league client you have, Trevor Bauer, is someone you've potentially had sex with. That's the tweet. That's it. That's the tweet.
Yeah, I mean, Rachel Lupa is an interesting case because Trevor Bauer is a certified scumbag, and I really don't respect anyone that works with him, and I think that he should be blackballed from the industry. So, I mean, I don't really. I think it's inappropriate for her to have relationships, but like,
right.
I don't care about that at the end of the day. If that's what she wants to do, if that's what she's going to do, she's going to collect professional athletes as clients and then have sex with them. Like, that's her prerogative, I suppose. Like, who am I to, tell her that that's wrong? Like, if the game is, if they still, these guys are still able to get opportunities and whatever, but her only client is, I don't care that she had sex with him. I care that he is a sex pest and a sexual deviant and has beat the shit out of women against their consent while they're trying to have sex with him. Like, so that's really what I care about, that he assaults women. So I couldn't care less about her relationship to him beyond the fact that she's willing to still represent him and he should be barred from the industry. And he's just using her to say like, oh, I don't hate women. Look, my agent is a woman. And it's like, give me a break. You're a scumbag.
Pat, you're quiet over there. Give us some insight.
I'm just enjoying Emily's take on a lot. I've been following Breaking Balls for a long time.
Thanks,
I just couldn't pass up the opportunity to jump on and kind of sneak in with you guys today. But I've been on a hiatus for a while, so I'm just kind of getting my rhythm back into talking. But no, the whole thing with Rachel Lupa and a lot of the women that you're starting to see come out to the limelight of sports and baseball it's very long overdue in general that women have that voice. You hear all the time, with women talking sports, which is why this podcast is very important. Emily's show is very important, because you guys were kind of like the forefront of it all. So when you see them getting into the, when men try to discourage or discredit some of the female sports fans on social media, Twitter is very toxic for that. Well, you're a woman, what do you know? Well, I know a lot of women that are a lot more athletic than I am, so they should have more of a say than I do. So that's where it comes into play. We need more voices, from everybody. It's not just a man's world. It's, we've seen a lot of breakthrough with coaching hires and GM hires, where it's about time. One of our first podcasts on this channel years ago was when we talked about bringing back, the League of Their Own, game. Why don't the women just, rather than just being softball players, which we know that they're just as athletic to play baseball and softball, rather it be that, softball is looked at as that weekend game, but it's actually very, it's just as complex as baseball is. But they should bring back some type of women's baseball. You're starting to see, you have more women playing football now, especially on the high school level. I see it, where the interest is there.
Right.
And women, wrestling in on the school teams, against guys, and guys are going, if you think you could do it, I'm not going to hold back on you. So you're starting to see all these breakthroughs from the kids all the way up to professional level. And it's just, it's good to see. And I think that it's just a matter of time before you start to see, along with the WNBA, you're going to see another women's branch of a lot of these other leagues.
Right. And I would agree with that, Tats. And, I have no problem with bifurcating women in sports in the way that, the WNBA and NBA are modeling. But I don't think that precludes that women leadership in MLB should be, we need to keep encouraging that and speaking out about that and putting, pressure on MLB at large about we want to see more of that. And in terms of the softball aspect of it, my memory and caffeine deficiency can't remember, but there are some colleges that are now offering women baseball programs. So there's a shift at that level. So between that and the co-ed little leagues, we need to get to upper tier, but some of that glass ceiling is shattering in those ways.
I was going to say that the softball and baseball have a lot more in common than I think a lot of people think. Not anyone in this chat, but I think a lot of people like in the Twitter sphere and the general fan population think. I never played baseball. I only played softball through college. And that's I like to think that I know a lot about the sport. And that is how I know a lot about it, because I have an inherent understanding of the sport on a very primal level like that, because they're both very similar in how you achieve your goals as far as hitting, throwing, and things of that nature. With that said, in my opinion, the only reason why we don't see any women playing baseball at higher levels is because they play softball. That this is the one sport where the biologic strength of men and women doesn't really come into play as much at those levels. That a woman can absolutely play defense at a pro level, but the problem is that they're not training for that. They're playing softball through college and they're playing on a smaller field. So if women or girls rather were encouraged to play baseball and then play baseball through little league, then middle school, high school, college, that you would see more competing at the very least in the minor leagues. But because they don't, that's the only reason why. And why we play softball, I don't know, because someone decided that women play softball and boys play baseball, because I think just back in the day, there was the need that they had to keep them apart. So they had to give women their version of something, and they play softball. So, and I love softball. It's very near and dear to my heart. It's something that I get choked up talking about because it has brought so much to my life. It means so much to me. So I don't mean to disparage the sport at all. No. I'm just saying that I think that that's the reason why that we don't even see it as much.
Yeah, I think that's a great point of women. Okay, we'll crack a window for you, but we're putting
exactly. But we're going to make it slightly different.
Yeah, we're going to be able to
for no reason
as much. And so Lori's saying here that to each their own, but she would never play to watch women play baseball.
Right.
So
I think that's what a lot of people said before the WNBA started. And look at the success that they're having now. You build, I guess. I mean, if that were the way things were going to go, we'd build it. If you build it, they will come. So
yeah, exactly.
And I don't want to forget to mention the Oakland A's, because it's very rare that I have any reason to mention them at all. I want to congratulate them. Veronica Alvarez, the reason I'm mentioning her, she's the new coordinator of player development in Latin America. And I think that's very cool. And that's got to be a tough job, because there can't be a lot of women in Latin baseball.
I would say not.
That's probably a challenge. But
so we're waiting for the day where we're going to see more of that from the Yankees. But
yeah, exactly.
I'll hold my breath. Well, they did have Rachel Balkovec, so I shouldn't be too nasty.
Yeah, absolutely. She's my hero. Lynn, you've got trivia for us this week, I believe.
Yep. Actually, before we do, I just want to plug. So Chris and I are ramping up for Women History Month in March, and we've been, like Chris just did, we're going to be reserving some time each week to talk about women in baseball. And so I've started creating my own library, and a teacher that I am, I started with youth books. And so for you parents out there, boys and girls, so this is a book that I would highly recommend. I never get the left thing right. But I want to plug it, a whole new ball game. It's a great history of the League of Their Own story, the Rockford Peaches, and all the other. Oh gosh, I'll just put it down. It's hopeless. And the League of Their Own really focused on the Rockford Peaches, but there are several, and there's an exhibit in the Hall of Fame as well. And I put in the chat the tag for the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League page on Twitter. Follow them because they're a wealth of information. But start educating your kids young about sports, not just baseball, NBA, and what women have accomplished and continue to accomplish. So this is our time to just put that plug in.
Yep.
And we're lucky this week. We have 2 trivia questions of the week. So Spencer with his weekly question, which always has a prologue. For over 20 years now, the Yankees have been a regular in the MLB postseason. 2008, 13, 14, and 16 are the only years they haven't made the playoffs. It all started October 3rd, 1995, as the New York Yankees hosted the Mariners in Game 1 of the ALDS. At that time, Yankee Stadium hadn't hosted a postseason since 1981. Pepperidge Farm remembers, so do I. But of all the players in that series, there was one who actually played in a postseason game at Yankee Stadium prior to the 95 ALDS. Who was that player?
Okay.
So that's lengthy, and so I'm going to put everything but the answer under our episode thread on the upper deck.
Wow, that's a great question.
So that you could absorb it and answer. And then our friend Katie Joe, and his handle is @Trivia7. When Bill Mazeroski hit his famous home run in the 1960 World Series, who was playing shortstop for the Yankees? Any guesses from the chat? This is one question that I wasn't alive for. So there's that. So I guess I have an experience.
That's it.
1960.
All right. Well, take your best shot at the trivia question. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment. Find us on Twitter, Facebook. Emily, so great having you here. Come back anytime you feel like it. We love having you.
Anytime. This is awesome. And thank you for getting me up early on a Sunday morning. So now I actually feel like a functioning member of society on this.
Well, we're glad that we have a function.
And Emily, for me, that what that would really mean in truth is take a nap.
I probably will.
So and as every week, you just remember you always have a reserved seat with Chris and me and special guests like Em and Tats. Thanks for joining us. You rock. Join us right here on the upper deck every Sunday at 11 a.m. live. Go Yankees.
Go Yankees.